What is the nature of self-doubt? How do we almost limit ourselves with our thoughts and set up certain boxes around ourselves regarding what we can do and what we can't do? Our mind, with its thoughts and its various thoughts that it has about itself, it can create a kind of box around our being, a kind of box which delineates a boundary, a boundary beyond which we cannot go to, which we cannot go beyond because it is outside what we can do. We doubt ourselves, essentially, you know, and we should think of this boundary that arises for us when we feel, say, uncomfortable about pursuing a certain thing, questioning of our ability to do that thing. We should think of this box and its boundaries as essentially a mental construct, a mental construct which inhibits our expression. And crucially, it inhibits us, it limits us. Because beyond this boundary that our mind has spun for itself, we see ourselves as essentially stepping into the unknown, into a space which is uncomfortable, a space which we do not believe we have the strength, the intelligence, or the ability to act within. And really, a question that we should pose to ourselves is how useful is it to have these kind of conversations in our head about what we can and cannot do? How useful in the past has it been to have these conversations? How useful has it been to limit our expression with these doubting thoughts? When we have a dream, when we have a kind of goal which we are deeply passionate about, we should ask, is it useful to doubt this dream? Is it useful to say that I cannot do this, or I'm not capable of doing that? Is it helpful to believe that I'm not capable of changing, that I'm not capable of growing? Our thoughts, they play a pivotal role in creating the reality that we experience. And therefore, it is vital to apply the utmost awareness and consciousness to the patterns of our thoughts, because they are the pattern of our reality generation. And we should contemplate whether the thoughts that we have percolating in our experience, we should think about whether they are bringing us into deeper harmony with our higher self, or whether they are limiting us, whether they're constraining us, whether they are preventing us from fulfilling our potential and pulling ourselves down into denser and less blissful states of being. You see, as is often depicted in movies, in TV shows, in cartoons, there is a depiction of the devil on our shoulder, a kind of voice, a subtle whisper, which plants these certain seeds of doubt, these seeds of insufficiency, of shame, of guilt. It tells us that we are not good enough, that we cannot succeed, that we are unworthy. But at the same time, we have access on the other shoulder to kind of an angel, access to various thoughts and feelings of wellness, of flow, of love, of openness, kind of childlike wonder, a kind of perspective which sees obstacles not as threats but as challenges to overcome. There is this kind of duality that we can look at, and we can choose which sort of source to tap into. We can listen to these thoughts which tell us that we are not good enough, or we could orient our awareness towards the blissful wonder of freedom from limitation. These thoughts, thoughts will always arise in your awareness as a kind of little hiccup, as a kind of notification. And it's really essential to remember that we are not our thoughts. Thoughts are merely the expressions of the mind. And the true nature of the mind is to be empty and silent. And when the mind is empty, we are completely present and whole. However, we often, as sort of skin encapsulated egos, we often become overly identified with our thoughts. And when we overly identify with our thoughts, the thoughts have a ability to fragment our experience. They create illusions, illusions about who we are, illusions about what we can do, what we cannot do. They create certain attachments that we have to certain outcomes. And when we become really so swept up in the noise of thought, we neglect silence. We neglect the silence of our truest and highest nature. And I believe that to act in the world in an enlightened manner means to act from a grounding in silence. And silence is limitless, whereas thought is inherently limited. Silence is, the ocean, the flowing ocean, and the thoughts, they are ripples within the ocean. And that's a way we can think about it. We can think of a guitar string as another analogy. There is the silent guitar string at rest, and when this string vibrates, emitting from the string are sound waves, are sounds, expressions, emanations, forms, things that we can label. But of course, the expressions are inherently limited. The thoughts itself. What is the nature of thought? Thought categorizes, it labels, it names, it boxes things in. They create identity, a kind of story about who we are, a story about ourselves, our strengths, our weaknesses, and we get so swept up, we fall for the story, and we forget that it is just a creation of the mind. And the mind and its creations is not our highest identity. It is an expression that originates in source, and we are that source. But there seems to be a tendency within creation, within incarnation, for the expressions to forget their source. There's a kind of amnesia that is induced. But when you almost wake up from this amnesia and you realize that your highest identity is not the limited egoic self, this body self that you imagined itself to be, you realize that really you are the awareness which underlies and transcends the mind. When you realize that, you perhaps you come to see reality as almost like a screen, and the awareness is the screen, and the various thoughts, feelings, and experiences that come and go are like these pictures that are projected onto it, and the pictures are temporary and limited, but the screen itself is constant, infinite, and free. And when we identify with the pictures that appear on the screen, we limit ourselves by that identification. But when we situate ourselves as the screen, as the awareness, we see ourselves as already free, as already limitless, and already whole. And you see, this freedom is not something that you need to attain or you need to cultivate. It is already there. It is the awareness that sustains and expresses itself in all things. And when we align with this awareness, there is a profound silence and stillness. The mind itself, it may wander, and consequently thought structures may arise, persist, and dissolve. But beyond this, there is a deep knowing that you are the ground of silence beneath it all. You see, you are not the objects of awareness that come and go. You are the awareness itself, permanent, eternal, and unchanging.